Hello and welcome into another episode of Half Court Press. He's Wilson Moore. I'm Jon Walker. Thanks for joining us today to talk some hoops. Wilson, we have less than a month until the season gets underway now.
25 days, I think, for Nebraska at least.
And counting.
Yeah.
27 for Creighton then. But before we talk about what to look for in the build-up and then on opening night maybe, how are you, man?
I'm doing pretty well. You know, last night I was making tacos and I was watching postseason baseball.
Okay.
And I was just thinking, is there anything better than this? And
tacos in postseason baseball.
Yeah. I make pretty good tacos too.
Okay.
Not to pat myself on the back too much. My tacos are pretty good.
Okay.
But then I did see there is something even better than making tacos and watching postseason baseball on TV. That is being at a postseason baseball game.
It's being at a postseason baseball game. More specifically, the first postseason baseball game at Kauffman Stadium in 9 years. Yeah. I'd assume most of our viewers, listeners, are Royals fans.
Probably.
And so I'm going to be public enemy number one in saying that I was not at the K for the Royals. I was at the K for the Yankees.
That's disgusting, first of all. I say that as a Twins fan. I don't know if
but that's
Royals
like
fans
a lot
really
more
have
that's
it
respectable.
Is.
I feel like the Twins and the Royals are kind of cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, you know, Midwestern, AL Central.
Build up
yeah.
and pray. And the Yankees are just like, here's a blank check. They're the evil empire. So, yeah, man. But it was fun. It was fun. Really, really fun. I went to the Wednesday night game. We're recording this on Thursday afternoon. Heck of an environment at Kauffman Stadium. That is postseason baseball. Yeah. Every pitch matters. Every swing of the bat, kind of makes your hair stand up a little bit. That's postseason baseball. But we're not here to talk about baseball. We're here to talk about basketball. And with that being said, since the last time we did this a couple of weeks ago, a lot's happened. Creighton officially started practice. You went to Big Ten Media Days in Chicago. I had to sit down with Greg McDermott to talk about the season. And we've just got a bunch of extra little nuggets along the way. So we're going to dive into all of that and more today. So let's start there, Wilson. Creighton's first practice was literally hours, maybe an hour after we recorded our last episode. And so that was kind of the beginning of hoop season for me. I think Nebraska had practiced the day before, a couple of days
2 days
before.
Yeah, I think we did that on Wednesday. I think Nebraska had started that Monday.
And Creighton went a couple of days later or a day later, whatever it was. But we found out that this preseason, as we all kind of knew, was for Creighton to, one, figure out what pieces of the puzzle are there. Two, it's Greg McDermott's job this preseason, and I'm sure it'll be through the first few weeks once play starts too, to kind of piece this puzzle together. That's what it's about. I don't think anybody has shied away from that in the program, that they lost Baylor Shireman and Trey Alexander, and they have a bunch of new pieces. 13 of their scholarships are filled by 6 new players, whether it be transfers or freshmen. Or Fedor Zugic, who we still don't really know what to classify him as.
What is he?
What is he? What is Fedor Zugic?
Who is Fedor Zugic?
Who is Fedor Zugic? We'll talk about him in a little bit. But that's what the preseason's about for Creighton, is really trying to step back and say, here's what we lost, maybe box score wise, but also the intangibles, obviously, and how do we try and replicate that? There's no one-for-one replacing Trey Alexander. There's no one-for-one replacing Baylor Shireman. But there are a couple of things that you can ask different people to do to maybe pick up some of the things that they did. And then, of course, let's use Pop Isaacs, for example. The way he plays the 2 is going to be way different than the way Trey Alexander played the 2. It's going to look different, even though the end result might be the same. They're bucket getters. Yeah. But it's going to look different. And so it's just really trying to figure out how all of that, fits together, pieces together, and what the puzzle looks like, come opening night. So yeah, I don't know, man. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be new look, but that's what the next, 4 weeks and the previous 2 weeks have been about for Creighton.
Yeah, well, I think what intrigues me the most to your point of that, is the fact that it's not a one-for-one swap. Like you said,
right.
Right. this is a team it's not rebuilding, but it's not just running it back with the same guys.
Yeah.
And I guess that is kind of the nature of college sports, just that you got people coming and going every season, especially these days. But just that of the kind of they're big three, and maybe to call anyone a big three is a cliche in basketball. But
not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4,
not
5,
6.
not 6,
Yeah, of those three, it was Trey Alexander, Baylor Shireman, Ryan Kalkbrenner.
Yeah.
And 2 of them are gone. And this is kind of, Kalk is the holdover from that team.
Yeah.
Kalk is the bridge between the 2023-24 team and the 2024-25
Absolutely.
team. There are obviously other guys who are on both, but it seems to me he is the guy that really, that links those 2 teams.
Absolutely. And that's kind of, I released my season preview. I don't even know. All the days are jumbled together now. Early this week, I released my season preview. And that was kind of the point of it is this is, in essence, a transition between eras of Creighton basketball. Because you just had, maybe you're still in, but regardless, you just had one of the most successful stretches in program history.
Yeah.
Period. 4 straight NCAA tournaments, would have been 5 if not for COVID. 4 straight NCAA tournament appearances, 3 trips to the second weekend. The first Elite 8 appearance since I don't even know, 40-something, when the tournament was 8 teams. You know what I mean? So first legit Elite 8 appearance in a really long time.
An eyelash away from a Final Four
eyelash
appearance.
away from and that's one of the things that Greg McDermott talked about when we sat down is sometimes it takes a whistle.
Yeah.
Or to not have a whistle, or the bounce of a ball. That's the difference between getting to the second weekend and the third sometimes. So that's transition between eras. What it was, where it's going, what it's going to be. New look, a lot of youth on this team. There will be a lot of youth next year too, obviously, when guys like Stephen Ashworth and Ryan Kalkbrenner are gone. But it's going to look different, no doubt. And so that's what it's about. That's what the preseason's about is – it's going to look different. How does it still work? And that was one of the things Greg McDermott was maybe not adamant about, but pretty set on is it's going to be different. But I think his words were, it's my job to put them in a position to win basketball games. How do I do that? And that's kind of where they're at right now. But from that first practice, I had a couple of notes. Jason Green is the talk of this team, I think.
Stock up.
Stock is up on Jason Green. And we saw that a little bit toward the end of last year. Got a lot of praise from Dan Hurley when they beat UConn and for what he did in that game. Obviously had the kind of dagger-esque putback slam against Oregon in double overtime. And when I talked to him after the Tennessee loss, he had said I wish next season was tomorrow. Yeah. And so this is a guy who was motivated all off season long, and everyone I've talked to, and from what it looked like from the practice that I've watched, he put the work in. Yeah. He admittedly said that this is probably the most work I've ever put in an off season, and it showed. The big thing that everyone's had questions about Jason Green is the jumper. Not necessarily if he could or could not make it, but would he be willing and comfortable to take those? That was kind of the part that we were missing from his game. Jason Green can guard 1 through 4, maybe 2 through 4, a small 5. But this is Creighton we're talking about. Was he going to, as they say, let it fly? After this offseason, yeah, I think he will. And that was probably the most notable note that I took away from the practice that I've seen, especially day one.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's a guy who they're going to rely on more this year than they did last year. To the point of the guys that left, the different structure of this team.
Yeah.
This is a team that needs Jason Green more and needs this version of him more than last year's team did.
Absolutely. You got some insight on a couple of players.
Yeah.
Because you went all the way to Chicago.
All the way to Chicago.
To go to Big Ten Media Days shortly after we, not right after, not like I went to Creighton practice after.
Not hours later. It was the next week.
But shortly after we recorded the last episode, you went to Chicago for Big Ten Media Days. What'd you learn? How was it?
It was good. Yeah, Nebraska sent Juwan Gary and Brice Williams along with Fred Hoiberg.
The faces of this year's team.
Yeah, and I think that is notable. It was obvious, I think, from the moment those two guys announced in the joint video they released last year that they were both coming back.
What was his name on the?
My best thing we learned from that video is that Brice is apparently in Juwan's contacts as Brice Will 100 emoji. Fantastic stuff.
That's good.
Yeah, but from the moment that came out, I think you could have guessed those would be the two guys. It's 2 or 3 most years.
Yeah.
Those would be the two guys representing Nebraska at Big Ten Media Days, and there's a reason for that. And I wrote about this, that it's this is their team now.
Yeah,
it wasn't last year. Last year, I think from a basketball perspective, but even more like from a leadership perspective, it was Rink Mast and it was Josiah Alec. Those were the guys who were the biggest voices in practice. Those are the guys who held others accountable. Those are the guys who, when Nebraska played poorly, when Nebraska lost badly, those are the guys who would come out in front of reporters and say, that was unacceptable, we have to play better.
And those are usually your captains.
Yeah.
Not always, obviously, but the face of the program is probably more accurate. The people you talk to after losses.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was always Rink Mast.
Yeah.
Who's still present.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting dynamic that I'm sure they'll have to figure out, because Rink is somewhat of a player coach this year.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, Fred had a little anecdote he talked about. He said there'll be times when, one of the big men has the ball, like, Andrew Morgan or Braxton Mia has the ball at the top of the key, and there's a cutter coming through, and they miss that cutter. They don't see it, and Rink reacts like on the sideline, because that was one of his strengths. He's a great passer out of that high post, top of the key area. So he's and then after the play he'll talk to those guys. So he's kind of a player coach. But Brice and Juwan are the leaders they're the leaders on the floor. And I think that in and of itself was notable, that they were the representatives at Big Ten Media Days.
What do you obviously have followed them for a year and a half now?
Yeah, but
obviously covered them all last season. What is different about those two that you have learned so far? Whether it's a mentality thing or their game's tweaked a little bit, what's different about Brice Williams and Juwan Gary?
I think they've both embraced their status as the faces of the team, as those leaders. I don't think it's something that's super natural for either of them.
Okay.
I know, like, Brice especially, I remember I wrote this big feature on him last year.
It was good.
Thank you. His mom saying, I think Brice kind of likes to fade into the background sometimes. Brice is not a guy who's really going to make himself the center of attention. He has to do that a little bit more. He has to be the guy a little bit more willing to talk. And he said at Media Days he is willing to do that. He said, the way I kind of interpreted what he said was, like, he's never been a loud guy, but, like, he'll say what needs to be said. He's not a yeller.
Right.
He's not going to tear into someone, but
real
like,
lead by example.
Yeah, lead by example, but also, still, say, hey, that has to be different.
Right.
That's not how we want to do things.
Yeah. And that's kind of, Creighton has gone through something similar. Obviously, I haven't, like, just last season and this offseason and then now, obviously, is but Creighton has gone through something similar over the last 12 months, really, in that one of the big things with Ryan Kalkbrenner last year was his voice. Like, they needed him to be more vocal. They needed him to step into a little bit more of that leadership role when he was never that person. Sounds like a Juwan Gary, like a Brice Williams. And you kind of just pick up on that as the season goes along, is what I saw last year from Ryan Kalkbrenner, from Stephen Ashworth, who will probably be a leader for Creighton this year. And so I think that'll come with time for those two, is when they get in their first big moment and everyone's eyes are wide in the huddle and Fred's trying to calm everybody down, sometimes it's about looking to the guy next to you and being calm. And if I can look at Juwan Gary and he's not breathing heavy or sweating and there's 4 seconds left and we're down 2, why would I be?
Yeah.
And so those are the things you just kind of get naturally.
And if there's a dude who's well suited for that, it's Brice Williams. If there's a guy who keeps a low pulse, who does not panic, like that describes Brice Williams. I thought it was interesting last year. Keisei Tominaga was the guy who would get a lot of attention from fans, from national media. You saw this a lot when Nebraska was kind of becoming. They didn't win enough in the tournament. They didn't win a tournament game, but if they had, they would have.
The first half of that game.
Yeah. But
everyone loved Casey.
Yeah, but even going into that, they were a storyline. This team that's the only power conference team that hasn't won a tournament game in the tournament for the first time. They were kind of this fan favorite, media darling type, and a lot of that focus was on Keisei Tominaga. But what I think a lot of people might have been surprised if they didn't watch Nebraska all season was when Nebraska needed a basket. When it's like, Nebraska's on the road, the other team has scored 8 points in a row.
Wisconsin has come back. Maryland has come back.
The other team's student section is getting into it. It's getting loud. Nebraska's saying, okay, like we need a bucket. Keisei Tominaga wasn't that guy. That was Brice Williams. When they, I think specifically at Indiana, there's one time I really remember Nebraska had like a 20-point lead and Indiana trimmed it down to like 2 or 3. Nebraska ended up winning that game, and a sneaky big play in that was after Indiana cut the deficit to below 5, whatever it is, Brice just comes right down. They clear out for him. He gets to work one-on-one, hits from the mid-range. And he was that guy. That's the guy he was last year, and they're going to need even more of that kind of stuff from him, where he's he's the guy like, okay, you're Nebraska. Things aren't going well. You got to prevent things from sliding. Who's going to get you a basket? Last year it was Brice Williams, and they're going to be relying on him to do that even more.
And that kind of helps that when your guy in those situations is coming back and now knows that he is allowed to step into that role. I feel like they played a lot of team basketball last year. It was Rink Mass this night. It was Josiah Alec this night. It was Juwan this night. It was Brice, Keisei maybe. But this year, they'll probably play similarly, I would assume. Like, I don't think Fred has ever run a system where it's one player give and go. Like, we're not talking about Trey Young or Cade Cunningham here, right? But we saw at Creighton last year, Baylor Shireman was somewhat not timid, not scared, but just wanted to make sure that he wasn't stepping on anybody's toes in his first year in the program. He knew that he was coming into a program, in a rotation, in a team, in a roster that already knew each other, that already kind of had roles. And he kind of took on more of that last year once he was definitively one of the guys. And so maybe that same jump, that same transition, whatever it might be, is in store in Lincoln for those two who are obviously at Big Ten Media Days. Is there anything you took away from Fred Hoiberg that you did not already know, whether it be about him, about the team, or anything really?
Yeah, I think we knew a lot of what Nebraska was looking like. We knew a lot of their roster building strategy, how this team came together.
That's kind of what we get for obsessing over these teams for 12 months of the year.
I don't know. I think it's I know Fred is very high on Berke Buchten gel.
Okay.
He said some stuff about he could be, he could play the 4. He could be kind of a small ball 5.
UCLA guy, right? UCLA transfer.
I don't know if they really had a guy who was like him. He's a big guy who can. He only shot 29% from 3, but they seem pretty confident that he's better than that. I think part of that, he shot very well in international play.
Okay.
But he's and we can get to the scrimmage that's going on Sunday later. But he's the guy I'm most intrigued to see play in person.
I bet. Kind of feels like. There's Juwan Gary. I'm assuming he'll play the 2 and 3. Just depends. Juwan Gary.
Like 3 and 4.
3 and 4.
But
I don't know. I feel like he could be the linchpin on kind of the wings. You shot 29%. But it's going to be entirely different. At Nebraska, than it was at UCLA.
Yeah.
Like entirely different, which is, I was going to say two, different leagues and everything, which is just not true
it
anymore.
is because he played in the Pac-12 last year and will play in the Big Ten this year.
Right. So, no, it's different.
Yeah.
So, maybe,
I think a similar guy, I think a similar guy, and that is Gavin Griffiths, and we're kind of getting off topic here, but, that was a big thing. Like, I know they're confident, and one of the reasons, if you want to be optimistic about Nebraska and about Gavin Griffiths, is that he is in a system in which he will be much better suited to let threes go, to take open shots. He was playing for Rutgers last year that didn't really
not that brand of basketball.
No. He'll be in a system now where he's, getting pin downs and curling around screens and doesn't have to take as difficult of shots as he did a season ago.
Yeah. That's a Gavin Griffiths is a really good segue into our next point, which is you broke down Nebraska's guards.
Yeah.
I broke down Creighton's guards. So why don't we talk about them?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's just keep it going.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about who the top guards are going to be in this backcourt, in this Nebraska backcourt, this Nebraska court. I don't know.
Nebraska.
I don't know.
I
We'll
don't
talk
know if
about
there's
a
anything
Nebraska
there.
court in a little bit. But yeah, just kind of tell me, when you step back and look at what this backcourt could look like, what is it probably going to look like opening night?
Yeah, I think part of the exercise that we did with these position breakdowns was we split it into guards, wings, and forwards.
Yeah.
So it was a little tricky for me. I don't know if you had this issue, but like, who's a guard and who's a wing?
I did.
Well, like Brice Williams, I wouldn't be shocked if he's Nebraska's starting two. But I classified him as a wing, even though we did play some point guard last year because same with Gavin.
Yeah, I did something similar with Fedor Zugic. I'd saved him for the wings because he's 6'6", 215 or whatever it was. Yeah. And I was like, this dude has played point guard, played a little bit of guard overseas. He's not going to play guard at Creighton. So no, I get you on that one.
Brice played point guard last season, kind of out of necessity, but also Fred has said Brice is still going to handle the ball a little bit this year. Brice, there will be some lineups in which Brice Williams plays point guard, even though, to segue into this, what I think the biggest thing about Nebraska's guards is, and I've written about this, I'm sure we've talked about this, they have two true point guards this season. They had 0 last year.
Yeah.
And I'm just interested in how that will affect the flow, how they'll be able to, if they'll be able to push the pace a little bit more, if they'll handle pressure a little bit better, which that wasn't like a huge issue, but I think like notably the Maryland game, they didn't do all that well with
A&M.
A&M, yeah.
Maybe defensively.
Yeah, that was A&M. It was more, they just got tossed under the basket, and A&M made shots.
Yeah.
But anyway, Raleigh Wooster and Aaron Eulis are both on the team this year, both on the active roster this year, which Eulis was not a season ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the big thing with the guards to me is how do these guys fit in? How will they make life easier for everyone else on the court?
Yeah, and that's like when Creighton played Nebraska last year, it was like this dude's open. It wasn't we have a guard working to get someone open.
Yeah.
It was like, just naturally he's who open. He is open, and that's who we're going to get it to. And that's kind of I think we saw in that Creighton game. That was Creighton's plan. Well, if we can limit this dude and we make these people shoot from deep, we like our chances.
Yeah.
And so they, when you have a true point guard, you can kind of flip the script on that a little bit because you get to run and get into your offense. Yeah. You don't have to just take what the defense gives you necessarily. So when it comes to Creighton's guards, it is literally the first line in the breakdown. It is not a secret that this is a backcourt trying to replace, here's what I said, trying to fill a Trey Alexander-sized hole. This is an NBA guard. Like we're talking about an NBA guard. one of the best players, one of the best guards in program history, right? And so that's what they have to replace. To do that, they went out and got Pop Isaacs. We mentioned a little bit ago, just a bucket getter. I think he's a little more fiery of a player than Trey Alexander was. Trey kind of had his own charisma where his game was so effortless it looked nonchalant at times. Like, oh, man, another 15-foot pull-up from Trey Alexander. You just expected it because that, and everything was so smooth. But I think Pop has a little bit more of that kind of fire to him, which, from my understanding, Creighton hasn't had all too often. Maybe it lights a fire. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see that dynamic. But, player-wise, they go out and get Pop Isaacs, expecting him to take on some of that scoring load and help run the backcourt next to Stephen Ashworth, senior who's back for his last year. Year 2 in Omaha after transferring in from Utah State. Started all what they play, 35 games a season ago. So he will be, I think, the guard in the backcourt, at least early, because of his experience running the offense in game. But Stephen Ashworth can play off ball quite a bit too. And he's good at it, good at finding his own shot, hunting his own shot, getting open without the ball in his hands. So I think you'll see a little bit of Pop and Steven kind of trade back and forth, running the offense or whatever that looks like. But then behind them is where it gets really interesting, Wilson, because last year, whether it was Steven, whether it was Trey, if one of those got nicked up, banged up, in foul trouble early, here comes Francisco Farabello. The ultimate sixth man is what I've called him, because how often do you have, a fifth-year senior who's going to willingly be your sixth man and never complain? And that's what Francisco Farabello did last year. So it'll be different. They have to find somebody to do that, and to do it, they have to turn to really 4 options behind Pop Isaacs and Stephen Ashworth. You have 2 of the freshmen, Ty Davis, Larry Johnson, and then you have 2 returners who just so happen to be high school teammates in Sterling Knox and Shane Thomas. So they've already been in the program for a year. Knox has kind of improved his all-around game, and Shane Thomas has too, especially on the defensive end of the floor, though, is where Shane Thomas could, I think, really kind of earn his worth in terms of minutes. But yeah, that's where it'll be interesting. Who's the first guard off the bench? Who's the Francisco Farabello of this year's team? I don't know if they have the answer to that question yet. They have a couple of preseason exhibitions, scrimmages, whatever you want to call them. And they have, let's call it how it is, 4 cupcakes to start the year. Like Kansas City, Rio Grande Valley, FDU, and Houston Christian. I think they'll have moments where they can experiment a little bit.
Yeah, I would think so.
And so I don't know if they have to have an answer to the Francisco Farabello question right now, but the important thing for this backcourt is they know who the starters are. It's going to be Stephen Ashworth. It's going to be Pop Isaacs.